first thing to mention, as the brother already introduced in his brief remarks at the start, is that this question does not hang on the far right. And most of your comments suggested this. Most of your comments were about how ordinary people feel threatened, how the presence this, the present that. So apart from the notion of propaganda, which would be something that we need to pick on, you yourselves have already started from saying that the main thing that you're looking at is not immediately the far right. What else suggests this to us is important in taking into account? The far right, their incursions into our neighborhoods, acts of violence, the rhetoric, the intimidation, these are all real. And these have to be met. But when we talk about Islamophobia, we have to talk about the broader picture. And the broader picture starts firstly with thinking about the way in which Islamophobia has been made respectable, in which Islamophobia has been normalized, you mentioned before, in which it has become part of the ways in which people talk about Muslims and their presence in this country. And so if that is the case, if we're talking about the way in which this has been normalized, then we don't start from the extreme. We start from the way it's become mainstream. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you ask most communities about where and how they are affected in the most obvious way, which is the way in which when we travel through airports, when we go into schools, when we manifest particular forms of Muslimness, when our faith becomes more present, we become the targets of surveillance, of control, of particular forms of state incursion. So we call this, as you all know, the policy of prevent and counter terrorism, and the way that it has created certain perceptions of Muslims, which then prevent Muslims from being able to exercise their normal form of being Muslims. So if we start from this, if we start from the facts of a policy that's instituted from the government, then we don't start from the extreme right. We start from where these policies are being enacted, and most governments, whether Labour or Conservative, have been behind the policies of securitization that have been in place now, right? Third thing, if we talk about the way in which Muslims are constructed as outsiders who come in, then the whole debate, which is structuring the way that Muslims are spoken about, is around immigration and asylum seeking. And these discourses on immigration, asylum seeking, and too many people being here, and how we must shut the doors and so on, are being voiced by Muslims in government, by people who are in government in all parties. They are completely at the center of the current government's policy, as well as the previous government's policy, and the one before that. So again, it is not the extreme right that has the preserve and monopoly on this discourse that is making Muslims into these threats to Britishness or outsiderness and so on. And fourthly, if we look at what the opinion polls tell us about the people who are voicing support for reform or who are exposing the issues around grooming gangs and so on and so forth, which is all targeted and wrapped around Muslims and their presence in this country, most of these people say they don't see themselves as extreme right. So if we target the discourse that is centered only on the extreme right, all of these people will continue to hold their opinions and say that's not us. It has nothing to do with us. So in other words, if we just focus on extreme right, if we say what we are combating is the extreme right, the majority of what is Islamophobia, drives Islamophobia, and is held by people as Islamophobia, will not even seem to be touched upon. Right? Okay, so in a moment we'll talk about some of the steps to take towards this.
There are many people, perhaps in this room, who may remember possibly similar kind of things in the early 80s, the violence in the 80s or the 70s in these areas, okay? And those were considered to be extreme far right often, but we know how complicit many of the agencies were with some of the violence. We know that how the police wouldn't take the violence seriously until much later on, etc. We also know that those policies and those kind of programs that these groups had were considered not to be part of Labour or the Conservatives. They were considered to be outside that. Think about, for example, repatriation. There used to be posters on the underground talking about repatriation. And then we thought we'd moved away from that and no mainstream political party would talk about repatriation. Now we can see the idea of repatriation has come back, but they don't call it repatriation, but it means the same thing. When they start thinking about, well, we can remove citizenship, etc., the same things are happening. So I think it's really, really important to pick up on Abdul Karim's point that's already made, that by talking about the far right, we fall into the trap of forgetting that what is really the case is the mainstreaming of these ideas and values, and then they say they're far right. The real danger is that they're mainstream. How can you tell the difference between some of the policies that are being suggested by Farage and by what has been suggested by the Tories, which has been suggested by Labour? Now the problem for us is that we have counted for almost 70, 80 years that Labour Party would support us, even when we knew they weren't supporting us. And now we need to educate the people who haven't had that experience to say, look, this party was not supporting us before in the 70s and the 80s, and it's not supporting us necessarily now, so we have to make them support us. We can't just give them our support when they won't support us. And that, I think, is a really, really important point. So one of the things that we, come across, everything that's been said about the main cause. If the main cause is the growth of Islam, then how many people want to actually end the growth of Islam? Because what it means, the end of growth of Islam, it means the end of us here. That's what it means, literally, because it's never be enough. It's not just this mosque and say, well, maybe we don't need to have mosques in the first place. And if you think this is far-fetched, then look at what's happening in Europe, where in countries like France and Austria, and other places, there in Denmark, they're moving towards limiting prayer spaces, mosques. And once you take the mosques away, you take away community centers, you take away community organizations, then the idea of being growing completely collapses. So if we want to maintain our presence, we cannot allow this to go unchecked. And that, I think, is really, really important. And one way to do that is to see that the real danger isn't the far right or the extreme right. It is the fact that the extreme right has become the mainstream. And that is the real problem.
Right. So to continue the conversation along the lines that you suggested, simply saying that our presence here, our mere being here, is perceived as a threat, and therefore what we need is awareness and education and so on. We need to start by asking, why is it that our simple presence is a threat? Because groups and their presence in this country has been a continuous part of the history, right? So what we need to see is that this isn't just a matter of, so the numbers are growing, therefore it's necessarily going to be creating fear and is going to create Islamophobia. There is a process behind it. There's a process of creating and constructing our presence as a threat and as a fear. So what we need to start thinking about, as was just described by Professor Salman, is that although you quite rightly say we Muslims put a positive view on our presence here, we lead by example, we lead by respectability, we follow the Sunnah, we follow the examples that have been given to us. But this is a political process, and it requires thinking politically about the political response. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to think, what does it mean to mobilize our communities, to instruct our communities, to think about how we as Muslims, it was mentioned before, institution building, organization building, you represent an organization. So organizations and communities and institutions have to engage with the political process in order to do political responses to what is a political problem. That's the first thing. The second is to understand, and all of you understand because you come from contexts where you have had to understand this, that struggles against colonialism, struggles against racism, struggles against Islamophobia are all interconnected. They all require that we understand the way in which institutions create us as a problem, and we have to respond to that with ways of undoing what it is that they are saying about us. So rather than just saying we will do our prayers, we will do charity, we will lead by example, we also have to understand how we have to unmake what it is that they are constructing and saying about us. None of this takes away from what many of you understand is the most practical preparation that we need to do. That is to say, you lead prayer spaces or schools, madrasas, you lead institutions like this great institution here, and all of these have to be prepared to respond to threats, to intimidation, to attacks, to the presence of those who will make us unwelcome here. So we need to create resilience, we need to create preparedness, we need to have protocols in place in every single one of our institutions to deal with responses. But that's a very practical, minimal thing that we need to do. We need to do much more that goes beyond the houses where we live within into the society, as all of you said right at the beginning.
I think the key thing, just to follow up on that, is, and some of you was implied in your answers and responses, is community work and community engagement. But the point about community work is also about mobilizing the community. I think one of the biggest dangers is that we are not aware of what is actually happening, and as a consequence, we can't help our communities. So give you one simple example. If, for the madrasas, do we teach children about Islamophobia? Do we teach them what to do when they encounter it? Do we teach people how to actually organize? The BBC, for example, is partially funded by all license payers' money. Therefore, it has an obligation to respond to the concerns of all the communities. But we know that this doesn't happen. So how do we act upon that? How do we teach others, ourselves, communities, to be able to recognize how you can take action? I often come to these things and people talk about the media. We know about the media. But what do we do about the media? Now, here it seems to me it's really important that we learn from the experience of others. We learn from the experience of our own history, but also our immediate history. How do you think in 1947 Pakistan came about? There was mobilizations involved, and mobilization wasn't just writing a letter to the Viceroy, it was actually organizing themselves. A lot of the kind of violence that was experienced in East London, in Whitechapel, it was about organizing and getting people on the street. Last summer, when all the riots were going on against Muslims, over 10,000 people gathered here around Whitechapel, and they basically who dared come then? So there has to be a recognition that mobilization can't just mean going and meeting your local councillor when they want to be meet, or your MP or something. It actually means having an agenda and saying, look, this is what you want, our support, but you have to support us as well. And it means being able to get the community behind this agenda. And I think that is a real critical work. Community work without a political agenda isn't going to be effective in a situation that we find ourselves in right now.
All of you, I am sure, know the name Islamophobia. All of you would probably say Islamophobia if you wanted to name the kinds of things that we are being targeted by. But at the moment, we have a conversation going on in Parliament about creating the kinds of legislation that we have been looking for in order to give us protection, reassurance, and recognition. And the suggestion is that it is not going to use the term Islamophobia at all. So the question is why? If this is how our communities name what it is that is targeting us, if it is the way in which we respond and mobilize against this, why is it that the term won't be used? So where is our mobilization? Where is our voice being heard? Where are we speaking to those in power in order to tell them how we want our recognition to come? So this is one thing. The second thing is that if you look around, the process by which we see Muslims doing engagement. You talked about engagement. You talked about going out into the communities and being part of it and showing that we are an addition to this community. Okay, so let's see where Muslims have done this. In the anti-Iraq war demonstrations, we saw numbers of Muslims present that were making felt their right to be political citizens of this country and to make their voice heard. And now, most recently when? In Palestine solidarity demonstrations, right? This is where we have shown that we are citizens of this country, that we are engaging with the political process, and that we want our political voice to be heard. And yet, what is the one form in which we have been most targeted over in terms of manifesting a political presence? It is precisely over the question of Palestine solidarity. So what the Palestine solidarity has shown us is that we need to have the kinds of things that have always mobilized us, which is for justice, against injustice, engaging in the political process, recognizing where Muslims and others are being targeted, and standing up for justice. And that means engagement in the political process.
I think it's really important that what we take away from here is the recognition that the understanding the threat from the far right and responding to it are connected. Unless we understand it, we can't respond to it. And what we've been trying to argue is that the far right is the symptom of the problem. The problem is bigger than that. And if you cure only the symptoms, you don't actually deal with the actual disease. And Islamophobia is the main issue that confronts the Muslim community. And part of Islamophobia is the denial that there is Islamophobia. So whenever we try to talk about Islamophobia, it is always being dismissed, that it's not important, it doesn't exist, etc. But this is exactly the same thing that used to happen about racism. When there were racist attacks in the streets of East London, the police would regularly say there was no racial motive involved. They would say there's no such thing as racism. Or if racism happened, it's just one individual. What we've talked about here, and what we've tried to show, that Islamophobia, and I think this point was already made, isn't about individuals. It's also about organizations, systems. Why is it that we have the same, anything that happens, you can count on how many newspapers, how many government ministers, how many MPs will find a way of blaming this on Muslims, whatever it may be. And therefore it is important that we recognize this is a collective problem, and collective problems cannot be solved individually. It's not like talking to one person and say, look, stop being Islamophobic, it's not good for you, whatever. This is a collective issue, and the first part of this is for us to insist upon, regardless of what the government says, that we want the recognition that this is the problem, and it is Islamophobia. No other community has to spend almost 30 years arguing this is the name of our problem. We have to continue to make that argument, and this is why it's really important that if we want to respond to the far right, we have to respond not just to the uneducated thugs, etc. The more dangerous ones are the ones who are educated thugs. They're the ones who go on the newspapers. They're the ones who appear on TV. They're the ones who are making possible the day-to-day activities, because they are creating excuses for them. So for that reason, the response to the far right must be a response that we want to government and communities and those who want our support and ourselves must be committed to taking action against Islamophobia in all its forms. And that means learning about what it is and then teaching our community how to combat it. If we do not do that, we are actually making them vulnerable, and we will continue down this road where Islamophobia means eventually Muslims will become like France, where basically all organizations like this have been shut down by the French government.
It's about you engaging and thinking for yourselves, and especially going from this notion that the only danger or the main danger is the extreme right, to thinking more broadly about it and to acting upon it. That's the single most important thing.
I grew up in this borough in the 80s, and we had raw experience of not just Islamophobia, direct anti-Muslim attacks. Racism in its pure form, from groups like the National Front and others. You had thugs dressed in army fatigue, skinheads, Dr. Martin Boots would walk past the East London Mosque in groups, in coaches, in buses, throw stones at the mosque window and the door, would provoke people, and this used to happen practically every weekend. And we could not do anything about it. This was a reality. When I used to go to school in Stepney School, we used to get attacked by the white people, racist, on the tube, on the bus, in the school. When I was in primary school, the head teacher at Thomas Buxton School was racist. We had to witness the head teacher pulling the ear of a child, of a student, in front of our eyes, literally pulled it off, because it's telling him off. We had to witness in Stepney School, in secondary school where I used to go, the head teacher was racist. He would not allow us to wear the hat, the Islamic hat for prayers. Okay? The following day, we decided that we will give every student in the school hats to wear, and everyone did the following day. That led to a riot in the school. Eventually, the head teacher got kicked out. This was a reality in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. What the brothers have just said, we are seeing a resurgence of this coming back today on the streets of London, in Leicester, in Manchester, elsewhere. And what they've said is very important, because there is a context to why the British government currently does not, will not, adopt the definition of Islamophobia, the term Islamophobia. Why? Simply put, it's because there is something called the Islamophobia complex or industry. They thrive on attacking Muslims and Islam. They thrive on passing policies against Muslims, restricting the wearing of hijab, restricting Islamic school, restricting Taraweeh prayers, what you can say in your dua, in qunut or not. There is a big industry, global industry, from America to Europe to the UK. This is why, and they will vouch, the current government, despite the previous all-party parliamentary group, which had over 800 submissions from people, experts like these two brothers and others, saying Islamophobia is the best definition, they are not using it. Instead, the leaked information is they will use the term anti-Muslim hostility, which does not stack up because it does not address the racial dimension of Islamophobia. That's the key. And for all of you here, I think I need to give you a bit of homework to, inshallah, for all of us. Get your pens out, get your mobile phones out. Who are the Islamophobia industry? Who are the people behind it? Who are the organizations? I'll give you some names. I want your children, when you go home, ask them to research them and to tell you who they are. Then in the next meeting, if there is one organized, you can brief everyone what you've learned from these groups. So the Islamophobia industry, the complex, some of them are Act for America. Write it down, Act for America. Second is Center for Security Policy. Center for Security Policy. Gatestone Institute. Gatestone Institute. Fairbrook Foundation. Fairbrook Foundation. Jihad Watch, classic. Jihad Watch. Memory, that stands for Middle Eastern, it's a long name. What they do, they pick up any khutbah, any speeches from any mosque, any organizations, they take it out of context and say, oh, these are terrorists. They give to government, and the government then passes law. Memory operates in the States as well as in this country. In the UK, there are three key ones. Middle East Forum, the Henry Jackson Society, the Henry Jackson Society and Policy Exchange. The last two were in the news lately because they are being investigated by Charities Commission. Okay, so please, if you would, in the next few days, take these names to your children, ask them to research who these groups are, educate yourself, then ask MCA to organize another briefing where you can say what you've learned from these groups. These groups, the Henry Jackson Society, the Henry Jackson Society and Policy Exchange. These groups, what they do effectively is carry out botched, fake, out of context research saying Professor Salman Saeed, he's an Islamist because he supports resistance in some form in Palestine, or he supports Taham's community fighting the English Defence League. They put it out of context and they will brief government and MPs and other think tanks, then they will pass policies. If they can't get him, they'll destroy his image. East London Mosque is a classic example. We've had so many case studies, so many investigations from Charities Commission based on rubbish allegations from these organizations. For example, what about khutbah? Why did we make dua for the people of Gaza? No mosque in this country can say, use the word M in the dua anymore. What do we use instead? Mustadafin, the oppressed. We can't use the other word. In the past, it was fine. Recently, only the last few days, you can't say intifada anymore. It's now illegal or to be. These are the groups who are behind all of this. Brother, you need to really understand. There's a big and deep work going on and they're well funded, not just by usual funders. Unfortunately, some of them are funded by Muslim countries, individuals and businesses. This leads to my second point. My second point about who are the far right. They're not just racist, they don't just like non-whites. They hate Islam pure. Some of them are linked to militants in Poland, in Germany and elsewhere. Some of them are linked to the Modi government in India. There are alliances between Hindutva, the extremists, and the far right. And we also know GB News in this country. GB News is the one that spouts out all the rubbish against ethnic minorities, against Muslims. Where are they registered? In Dubai. Out of all the countries, they're based in Dubai. Tommy Robinson, where is he now? He's in the UAE. He's spouting this rubbish about immigration, about Muslims. Thankfully, one of the Muslim boxers from here was there on a tour. He took him out. He said, "What you talk? If you don't like Muslims or Islam, what are you doing in a Muslim country? Get out." So he challenged him. So this is the reality. And prior to that, this Tommy Robinson went to Palestine, doing the same thing. So there are global connections to this Islamophobia industry, this far right. They're not just innocent people. My second point is, there are victims, the real victims from these attacks. We know, the Battle of Cable Street, not far from here in Shadwell. Everyone came out to fight the fascists, the racists. We know what happened to Al-Tab Ali just around the corner. He was killed. We know what happened to Makam Ali in Finsbury Park Mosque and Mohammed Salim in Birmingham. These are real attacks. These people are killed. Even only in October, when the UKIP tried to come to Tower Hamlets, one of our Somali sisters in Docklands, where I live, she was about to chair a meeting about Islamophobia. She was ambushed by 30 thugs and she had to run for her life. So this is happening even today. So it's not just people exaggerating the threat of Islamophobia. It's real. It's happened in the past, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's happening now. My third point is, unless we address it fully, not just in community awareness, we have to engage in research. We have to fund projects like Professor Salman and Brother Abdul Karim, the work they do. Otherwise, they can't get this message out to government, to policy settings and others. We can just go and protest, but that's not enough. We have to have a holistic approach to this far-right Islamophobia. It's even happening in Bangladesh, through India. You've got elections coming up in a few months' time. Who's promoting all this rhetoric and division? It's India. So we have to wake up to the fact this is a real situation. Yes, our da'wah is important, our tarbiyah is important, but the far-right and Islamophobia is far greater, in my opinion. Why? Look at what happened in Bosnia in 1995. Srebrenica. Who's heard of Srebrenica before? Anyone here of Srebrenica? Everyone know where Bosnia is? Okay? What happened in 1995? A genocide took place where nearly 10,000 Muslims were massacred by Serbs. How did it start? They said these Muslims, they're not like us, they're inferior. They're different. The us and them game. They dehumanized them. They said they're like animals. They can be killed. They have no rights. Same situation you see in Gaza right now, with the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Yeah.
They dehumanize them. They said they're not worth living. They can be dealt with any way we like. So that led from this attacking us, saying these are bad people, these are inferior, they have no brains, to eventually passing policies, then to some attacks, eventually full-scale genocide in Srebrenica. And to this day, they are paying the price. They still know. I know families, because I do a lot of work in Bosnia. I know families right now. The family member who was killed by the Serb, they know this Serb person is still walking the streets in Sarajevo. But this person won't say where the body of that person is. To this day, it's happening. So this is the situation. And look at the situation for the Uyghur Muslims, the Rohingya, Palestinians, Kashmir, all over. So unless we act now, brothers, unless we act now, not just, we speak about this once a year, it needs to be in our syllabus. It needs to be in a members' guidebook that Islamophobia and the far right and what we can do needs to be a top topic. Otherwise, we'll just gather like this every now and then and forget about it. But the consequences will be severe. And I told about the law earlier on. In October 2025, a couple of months ago, alhamdulillah, all of you responded when UKIP wanted to come to town hamlets.
Yeah.
We stopped them, alhamdulillah. Everyone got together, 10,000 people came out, our youth came out also, young people. These are gangsters, people who would not normally come to the mosque. They came out organized. Yes, they covered their faces. They had good reasons to. They don't want to be picked by the police. But they didn't break any law. They don't damage any shops. They don't, get drunk. They were disciplined. They came out to defend you and I. They did that. But remember, they're coming again. They just announced 2 days ago, UKIP will be coming to town hamlets again, end of January. So what do we do? Do we mobilize again? What do we do? Our first response is we will try for the authorities to get them not to come to the borough, move them somewhere else. If they don't, and even if they're forced to go somewhere else, we still need to mobilize, because there is power of the streets. If you're on the streets, it shows that there is a presence. We are working with non-Muslim friends who are also anti-racist. It shows it's not just a cause for Muslims, for everyone. When we're on the streets, we reclaim the streets. If you don't turn up and they come for whatever reason, they've won. And the optics is not good. Tower hamlets, why are they targeting tower hamlets? One, because we have the biggest Muslim population in the UK. We have the largest mosque in the whole of Europe. 10,000 people pray in this masjid. We have a mayor who's brown. Okay, they can't accept it. Okay, we have a lot of good work happening with the interfaith communities. When the English Defence League tried to come to tower hamlets in 2010, 2011 and 2013, we faced them off. Why? Because we had a rabbi, a Jewish person and an imam standing in front of the mosque saying, this is our mosque. You can't pass by. And they never did. That eventually led to the collapse of the English Defence League, effectively. So what I'm saying to you, what I'm appealing to you is, these kind of seminars are good. Take the expert opinions and analysis from our experts, but we need to have a long-term action plan to really make it work and be ready for any eventualities. So this is my plea to everyone. I'm from the area, I'm from you, I was part of IFE, MCA, but I know the power MCA has. We have numbers, alhamdulillah. We have resources. We have people who can sacrifice. We've seen it for decades and decades. And that needs to be refocused a little bit more on the community welfare and community defense. That's what I'm appealing to you, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Well, it's a fact that there are many research organizations who work in policy and academia as well as in government who basically are trying to target the Muslim community through research which are not credible, mainly saying that the Muslim community is a threat, that the leadership is a threat, that some of the mosques are carrying out extremism and terrorism, and they regularly, on a regular basis, brief members of parliament, the government, special committees, and these committees and these interventions eventually lead to policies that target the Muslim community, such as restricting our freedom in the UK. And we as a community need to also get a handle of that. And how do we do that? We need to start investing money and time into Muslim researchers and even wider researchers who are genuine people to really counter these negative narratives and produce papers and evidence and research, so that way the wider community can see the reality and what is accurate or not.
I think the issue isn't that they're working behind, they're working right in front of our eyes, and we just need to open them. I think it's a big thing that it's somehow hidden. Islamophobia is not hidden anymore. It's out there in the plain sight. I think how we have to tackle them is also to educate ourselves and those in our community who are do not want to use the word Islamophobia. They think that the only way forward is doing exactly what the Islamophobes say. That, I think, is the biggest problem. And we have to basically say we have to fight Islamophobia and struggle against Islamophobia, and we can't allow our people in our community to divert us from this challenge of fighting against Islamophobia.
Social media has its own logic, and young people, they're born digital. They know how to handle social media. But what they need to understand is what we call critical media literacy. So they need to understand that the messages that they receive, how it is that they are constructed, who is disseminating them, how are they gaining traction, and how to address and undo that. So young people are the best position, in fact, to respond to this. But what they need to do is the opposite of what you're saying. It's not anger, it is not acceptance, it is active engagement. They need to call out what they see, they need to report what they see, they need to undo, educate, and engage. That is the single most important thing.
আজকে মুসলিম কমিউনিটি অ্যাসোসিয়েশনের জাস্টিস ডিপার্টমেন্টের পক্ষ থেকে আমরা এই অনুষ্ঠানটার আয়োজন করেছি মূলত আমাদের বিভাগীয় রিজিওনাল এবং ইউনিট পর্যায়ের আদল জাস্টিস সেক্রেটারি যারা আছে তাদেরকে এই বিষয়টা বোঝানোর জন্য যে ফার রাইট বিষয়টা আসলে কি এবং কিভাবে আমরা এটাকে ট্যাকল দিতে পারি। এটা আমাদের জন্য, আমাদের কমিউনিটির জন্য খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ একটা বিষয়। আজকের এটা অনেকটা সেমিনার টাইপ প্রোগ্রাম হয়েছে এই জন্য, যাতে করে তারা তাদের অঞ্চলে আমাদের অন্যান্য মুসলিম কমিউনিটিকে এবং বিশেষ করে ইয়ুথদেরকে, ছোট বাচ্চাদেরকে, ইয়াংদেরকে যাতে ফার রাইট বিষয়টা সম্পর্কে, কারণ অনেকগুলো বিষয় আছে আমরা সুপারফিশিয়ালি বাহির থেকে আমাদের মতো করে বুঝি, আসলে এটা ডিপে আরও অনেক বিষয় রয়েছে এটার বিহাইন্ডে। কারা এই ফার রাইট গ্রুপগুলো ক্রিয়েট করে, কেন করে, ইসলামোফোবিয়া কেন হয়, এর বিহাইন্ডে কারা জড়িত এবং কারা ফাইন্যান্স করে, কারা পলিসি মেকিং করে এবং কিভাবে আমরা সেই জিনিসগুলোকে ট্যাকেল দিতে পারি, এটা নিয়ে একটা আলোচনাটা, এবং এটা কন্টিনিউ হবে ইনশাল্লাহ। এবং আমরা রিজিয়ন ভিত্তিক আমাদের জনশক্তিকে এবং বিশেষ করে কমিউনিটির পিপলদেরকে সচেতন করার জন্য, যাতে করে আমরা ভবিষ্যতে এটা মোকাবেলা করতে, ফার রাইট গ্রুপকে বা মোকাবেলা করতে পারি, ইসলামোফোবিয়া ট্যাকেল দিতে পারি, একটা হারমোনিয়াস কমিউনিটি ডেভেলপ করতে পারি ইনশাআল্লাহ।